This is Steve Ridgel, and as I travel around and talk to churches and do some leadership consulting, I find a lot of churches who um, who have tried to implement changes, sometimes radical changes, or they made a clear statement: we are not going to change things, we're not going to do things different, we're going to stay right where we are. And sometimes those go okay. Sometimes you lose a few members, sometimes you gain a few, but sometimes you split a church right down the middle. Half your church leaves because you wouldn't do what they thought you ought to, or you did what they thought you ought not to. And I used to think it was just because I was in a church that happened to, split a church right down the middle. I was in leadership for part of that, and then I got out of leadership because I just didn't feel like it was going to end well. And at this point, I'm not going to argue about whether you should or shouldn't do things. I know churches that, in my opinion, probably should have made some pretty significant changes and just wouldn't. And I know some churches that made some pretty significant changes and probably shouldn't have. Sometimes those changes or not changes are based out of Scripture. Sometimes I think, Scripture's pretty clear. You need to do this. You're not. You ought to change. Or Scripture's pretty clear. You ought not to do this. But a lot of times it was just judgment. I mean, it's okay, maybe this, maybe that. Might have this been okay, might not. But you don't read your congregation. So I have a lot of church leaders say, Steve, why didn't they? What happened? What went wrong? So I'm going to tell you three reasons I think churches split when they make significant decisions. And I'm counting making a decision when you refuse to do things differently or when you do things differently. Either way, that's a decision you make. Number one, some people don't change because, well, they don't trust the leadership that's making the change. The leaders have studied it, and the leaders are sure, and they get up and tell the congregation, follow us, we are going to stay here, or follow us, we're going to go there. And they just don't trust their leadership. Now, there can be a number of reasons why members don't trust their preacher, their elders, their leadership team, whatever it is. Sometimes it's because they just don't know you. If they knew you better, maybe they would trust you. You have to really if you're going to lead a church, you have to have a lot of trust. Especially I tell preachers when they go to a new church and say, we're going to start doing this, or let me be clear, we're not going to, and they don't even know you yet. Be real careful with that. They've got to know you. And that comes from a lot of time doing life together. You build trust by being in their lives when things are hard and by giving them good guidance, scriptural advice, those kind of things. That builds trust. So sometimes they don't follow you because they don't trust you. They just don't believe you're doing what's best for them. Sometimes, number two, you just didn't explain it well enough. You spent 6 months making a decision to do or not do something, got up and announced it in a 5-minute announcement and wondered why the whole church didn't say, got it, thank you. You've got to really explain that. And I'm going to tell you this, if you're explaining why you're not going to do something, you've also got to explain that you understand what it would mean to do something differently. They've got to know, both sides, and they've got to see your reasons for why you're doing what you're doing. So sometimes you just didn't explain it well enough. So sometimes they don't trust you. Sometimes you didn't explain it. Number three reason it happens, sometimes they just believe you're wrong. They believe you're wrong. The Bible teaches this and you refuse to do it, I can't stay here. Or the Bible teaches this and you're going to ignore it and I can't stay here. Whatever it is, a lot of churches split over some kind of theology because some of the members they just think you're wrong. Now, what do I do? Well, if they don't trust you, you work harder to establish trust. And maybe that starts in an apology. If you didn't explain it well, maybe you get up and say, I'm sorry, we didn't do this well, let us go back through it. And if they think you were wrong, at some point you may have to say, we're going to disagree on this. This is the kind of church we're determined to be. But we love you, and if this doesn't fit you, find a better place. You don't have to be mean, bitter, vicious. Just sometimes people just don't agree on what's right. So if you're going through one of those things, I hope it goes well for your church. If you decide to stay where you are, I hope that's a good decision and your church supports it. If you decide you need to change, I hope it's a good decision and your church supports it. This is Steve Ridgel saying sometimes it just doesn't work like we want it to.